I will either have a divided India or a destroyed India, had said Jinnah. While he managed the former, the Indian state is intent upon managing the latter through uncontrolled runaway appeasement. And unless one understands the various stages of it, the progression, decade upon decade, through those stages, the reasons that led the Indian state to construct, implement, and then breach those stages, unless one does that, one can neither recommend nor apply a cure to this disease of appeasement. The three stages of appeasement are welfare, wokefare, and warfare. The Indian state has not only progressed through these stages, it is now unapologetic about projecting them as an achievement of sorts. Let me explain. The first stage of appeasement, welfare. Welfare targets the money. It starts innocuously with the flawed pretext that the Muslim minorities are worse off than the rest, and that they are victims, and that they are always exclusively suffering and fare worse off, and every social strife, and that because of this, not only do they need preferential care, it is the majority's obligation and moral duty to be preferential towards them. Not for nothing did Prime Minister Manmohan Singh assert that Muslims have the first right to resources. And so you have the state giving Muslims Hajj subsidy for decades, giving blanket reservations to Muslims, rich or poor, homeless or billionaire, by snatching it from the OBC quota, using taxpayers' money to host grand iftar parties, asking government-run UGC to fund minority institutions that keep 50% seats reserved for minorities, plundering state coffers to pay monthly salaries to tens of thousands of Maulvis, giving scholarships and shadi shaguns to Muslim women, providing midday meal dining hall for only those schools having 70% or more minority students, giving interest-free loans to set up shops on Waqf land, funding hundreds of madrasas, the Islamic schools, and all this while grandly proclaiming that we are a secular state. That is, there is complete and total demarcation between state and religion. The next stage of Muslim appeasement is more dangerous, wokefare. Wokefare targets the mind. This is the stage where the Indian state employs a quite brilliant tactic to appease and benefit its Muslim vote bank. It poisons the Hindu mind with self-loathing, hatred for his own religion and way of life, drilling apathy towards the slow destruction of Hinduism, consciously and subconsciously, through speeches, broadcasts, policies, arts, culture, cinema. So you have Mahatma Gandhi saying, quote, Hindus should not harbor anger in their hearts against Muslims, even if the latter wanted to destroy them. Even if Muslims want to kill us all, we should face death bravely. And if they establish their rule after killing all Hindus, we would be ushering in a new world, unquote. So you have Nehru saying, quote, the responsibility for communal peace rests on the majority community, that is, the Hindus. If there is a breach of this peace, I would start with the presumption that it has been caused by the Hindu communal elements, unquote. So you have Nehru asserting that, quote, Babur was one of the most cultured and delightful persons one could meet. He did not destroy as his ancestors did. He was a gallant knight, unquote. There was no sectarianism in Babur, he said. No religious bigotry. This is from Nehru's own book, Glimpses of World History. This, despite Babur saying it himself, that quote, I was a wanderer for the sake of Islam and battled infidels and Hindus determined to become a martyr. But thanks to Allah, I became a Ghazi. So you have Babur's tomb visited by Nehru in 1959, by Indira in 1968, by Rajiv in 1976, and by Rahul in 2005. But none of them ever visited Ram Janamsthan. So you have Nehru trying to stop the president from attending the consecration of Somnath, saying, quote, he feared revivalism of Hinduism. So you have Bollywood almost always demonizing Hindu priests, Hindu rituals, Hindu practices, but glorifying Muslim rituals and Islam. So you have our roads, our institutions, our cities, named after the barbarians who destroyed our roads, our institutions and our cities. So you have from Somnath to Kashi Vishwanath, Babarpur to Bakhtiarpur, Allahabad to Aurangabad, Martan to Mathura, the injustices towards Hindus and their culture deliberately being made visible, as though to lionize the debasement, celebrate the humiliation. And the irony is that the same people who have, through Wokefare, taught us to forget historical injustices, drilled this self-loathing in us. These same people want others to fight historical injustices around the world. So they condemn barbarians of the West, hitherto worshipped like the Confederacy generals, Rhodes, Churchill, Pizarro, Murray, Colston, Leopold. They celebrate their roads and buildings being renamed, their statues being brought down. But here in India, this same set eulogizes barbarians like Tipu, Aurangzeb, Babur, Khilji. Wokefare has led to our children being taught to hate those they should love and love those they should hate. Wokefare has led to our leaders proclaiming that demography shift is not an issue at all, that those who warn us about it are actually communal bigots. Look, if you were to take as starting point the premise that all religions are exactly the same, then there is no issue. Because under that premise, if one religion population can be the majority, why can't be the other? But the fact is, all religions are not the same. Some religions exhibit predatory, supremacist, exclusivist views and practices. The truth is, if such a religious denomination becomes majority population, it begins very quickly dictating its social practices upon others. There are some schools now in Jharkhand that have Friday as a holiday instead of Sunday. We have seen what happened in the Kashmir Valley, and I'm not just talking about the Kashmiri Hindu genocide of 1990. The sitting chief minister now even called for stoning as a punishment there. We have seen the state of homosexuals and atheists and women under the majority of such religious denominations. Atheists are condemned to death in 13 Islamic countries. Homosexuals are caned, women discriminated. We have another chief minister, this time of Bengal, warning Hindus to not venture into quote unquote Muslim areas. Fact is, changing demography shifts a government's decisions towards Wokefare. One feeds off the other. Opposing CAA, appointing Muslims on temple boards, curtailing the time duration traditionally permitted for Durga idol immersion by making way for Muharram procession, promising to give land to imams for construction of houses, uprooting lampposts that have Hindu symbols, scared to list out hundreds of Muslim mob hate attacks, lynchings, attempting lynchings, while naming selectively only the Hindu mob crime attacks. These are all examples where Wokefare has directly led to formulation of state policy and overturning of even Supreme Court judgments like the Shah Bano. It is but obvious that welfare and Wokefare can only lead to the third, perhaps terminal stage of appeasement, and that is warfare. Warfare is when you enact laws and policies and acts that constitutionally and legally favor one community and discriminate against the other community. So you have the draconian Waqf Act that has usurped thousands of acres of government, personal, even temple land. The world over, disputes over property are settled using existing laws that are community and religion agnostic. But in India, the Muslim community is armed with another set of laws, those that are patently discriminatory towards members of the other community as a primary instrument of defense or indeed offense. Is there a Hindu equivalent of the Waqf Act? No. Why doesn't the state promulgate one in the interest of equality then? Let those who want continuation of the Waqf Act watch as Hindus lay claim to thousands of mosques and Muslim villages and enjoy the privilege of the disputes being addressed primarily not through the courts but via the clauses and strictures of the Hindu equivalent of the Waqf Act. But would this ever happen? The Waqf is a parallel government being run by the state. In its board, it has its own legislature. In its surveyor, it has its own executive. And in its tribunal, it has its own judiciary. Next, you have the conjunction of the Right to Education Act, RTE, with the 93rd Amendment that allows Muslim schools to escape keeping reservations for the economically weaker sections, while only Hindu-run schools are obligated to keep 25% seats reserved for the economically weaker section, leading to thousands of Hindu-run schools being shut down. Are we worried about it? Next, you have the state prohibiting Hindus to even approach the court to reclaim their demolished temples through the Places of Worship Act. Next, you have the state controlling and taxing only temples and temple land but not mosques. How can the state be secular and at the same time control more than 110,000 Hindu temples and their revenue? As years go by, Mosques will have more and more money to set up their schools and hospitals, rightly so. And temples will have less and less money to set up their schools and hospitals. Is that right? One can only guess what would happen then. It already has started happening. Lakhs of Hindus are leaving the fold of Hinduism, coerced by inducements. Next, you have no obligations for Muslims to accept the Uniform Civil Code, to accept the CAA, to accept laws and acts that the rest of India does. Next, you have terrorists and rioters being released. Remember the recent release of the Coimbatore bombers despite the refusal of the Supreme Court to give them bail? And the release was trumpeted by the government as an example of being concerned about the minorities. You have the Congress releasing PFI cadres, hundreds, releasing those who ran over and attacked police stations like in Hubballi. Its leaders defending Simi in court. Its chief crying tears at Batla encounter. Its PM demanding an apology from Denmark for the Prophet cartoons. So something that started with an innocuous scholarship ends with releasing terrorists. This is what the third stage of appeasement achieves. Hubris in one community and anger in the other. Hubris that Indian laws don't apply to us, and anger that Indian laws are made to discriminate against us. And this leads to warfare. There we have it then. The three stages of appeasement: welfare, wokefare, and warfare. Jinnah must be laughing. His cackle echoes in the dungeons of Patal Lok below. In his life, he achieved the division of India. And in his death, he has achieved its destruction.